"Show your credentials," Byron Slate said. Dr. Ronan Adeyemi held out the emergency access code, the confirmed service window, and the entry notice approved by Astergate Operations at 5:16 that morning. Byron did not scan any of it. He looked at Ronan's plain field jacket, his worn laptop bag, and the small tool pouch in his hand, then smiled toward the two security officers behind him. "People like you do not walk into control rooms." The lobby went quiet. Zuri Chenoweth stopped beside the visitor turnstiles with a tablet in her hand. She knew Ronan's face from training calls, system diagrams, late-night incident reviews, and the architecture manual that everyone inside Astergate claimed to understand. Byron only saw a black man with a tool bag asking to enter a room he thought belonged to someone more polished. Ronan did not raise his voice. "Scan the code," he said. Byron folded his arms. "I decide what gets scanned at this gate." 5 minutes later, every light in the lobby turned red. The elevators stopped. The automatic doors locked. A warning filled the main screen. "Civic Grid Nexus failure. Chief Engineer override required." Byron turned back to Ronan. For the first time that morning, he stopped smiling. Astergate Technology Complex had been built to look impossible to break. The lobby had security glass, silent turnstiles, biometric readers, and a wall screen showing the words Civic Grid Nexus Final Stability Test. It controlled power flow, backup supply, server cooling, elevator logic, access doors, fire zone routing, research wing sensors, and the emergency recovery chain that kept people safe when one system failed. If Nexus ran correctly, the building looked effortless. If Nexus failed, the building could lock itself in layers. Data could isolate, server rooms could overheat, elevators could hold between floors, safe doors could become sealed doors. That was why Ronan was there. Not as a visitor, not as a consultant to be called when convenient. He was the chief engineer and core architect of the recovery system. His name was already inside the emergency specialist list. His code was already active. The gate already had the answer. Byron refused to read it. That morning had started 3 hours earlier in the central control room. Zuri Chenoweth had been reviewing overnight logs when a small timing conflict caught her attention. A maintenance patch from the operations team had changed the way backup readiness was reported during load transition. On an ordinary day, that patch would only create noise. During the final stability test, it could become dangerous. Zuri checked the simulation again. Primary load reduced. Backup supply readiness delayed. Nexus interpreted the delay as instability. Recovery chain moved toward lock. She sent the warning to Gideon Frost, the control room manager. Power transition simulation shows conflict in backup chain after auxiliary patch. Recommend holding final stability test until chief engineer review. Gideon responded 7 minutes later. "Do not complicate launch day. We ran enough tests." Zuri stared at the message. Astergate had board observers arriving before noon, investors after lunch, a media preview by afternoon. Everyone wanted the test to run on time. But systems did not care about calendars. Zuri sent the log to Ronan. Ronan had just landed after an overnight technical consultation. He opened the file in the back of a rideshare and saw the danger before the car reached the highway. The auxiliary patch had not broken the whole system. That was what made it easy to ignore. It only changed the timing of one readiness confirmation. If the test forced primary power to reduce before that confirmation arrived, Nexus would think the backup supply was unstable. To protect the building from conflicting human commands, it would isolate core zones and block ordinary operator recovery. In the right hands, it could be fixed. In the wrong hands, the first repair attempt could make the lock harder. Ronan sent one message. "Do not run final stability test until I verify the safety chain. I am coming directly to Astergate." At 7:38, operations approved his entry. At 7:41, the system generated his temporary code. At 7:45, his name appeared on the emergency specialist list. Dr. Ronan Adeyemi, Chief Engineer, Civic Grid Nexus Core Architect, Emergency Override Authority. At 7:59, he walked into the lobby. Byron Slate saw him before the scanner did. Byron had been morning security lead for 9 years. He understood badges, uniforms, visitor stickers, executive smiles, and the pleasure of making certain people wait while others walked through. Ronan approached the main checkpoint. "Emergency access for central control," he said. "Dr. Ronan Adeyemi." Byron glanced at the tablet without scanning. "Central control, yes. You here to fix a printer?" One of the junior guards laughed, then looked down when Ronan did not react. Ronan said, "I need access to the control room. There is a conflict in the backup safety chain." Byron looked past him toward the lobby screen. "Final stability test is internal. Visitors go through reception." "I am not a visitor." "That is what visitors usually say." Ronan held out the access code. "Operations approved my emergency entry. Scan this and it will verify through the system." Byron took the card between 2 fingers. He did not scan it. "The card looks new." "The card is temporary. The code is active." "Where is your escort?" "Emergency engineers do not wait for escort when a pre-warning is active." Byron smiled. "That sounds convenient." Zuri walked quickly across the lobby. "Byron, wait!" "This is Dr. Adeyemi. He is the chief engineer for Nexus." Byron finally looked at her. "Miss Chenoweth, I am handling security. You need to scan his code. I need to keep unauthorized people out of the control room. He is authorized. Then he can show credentials." Ronan held out the same code again. "The credential is in the system." Byron lowered his voice, but the contempt sharpened. "I mean real credentials." Ronan said, "The system will verify me in less than 1 second." Byron raised his voice. "Show your credentials." Zuri said, "His name is on the emergency specialist list." Byron pointed at her tablet. "You are an analyst, not security. And you are security, not engineering." One junior guard looked at the floor. Byron stared at Zuri. "Careful." Ronan stepped half a pace forward, only enough to take the pressure off her. "Mr. Slate, every minute you delay increases risk. Call Marjorie Flint. Call Gideon Frost. Call legal. Or scan the code." Byron looked at Ronan again. Plain jacket, old laptop, scratched tool pouch. No executive escort. No expensive watch. No one standing beside him with a title Byron respected. He decided before the system could answer. "People like you do not walk into control rooms." This time, he said it loudly. The words crossed the lobby. Zuri went still. Ronan's eyes changed, but his voice remained calm. "Are you refusing to verify emergency access because of how I look?" Byron smirked. "I am refusing to let a stranger talk his way into central control. Then scan the code and make me not a stranger." "No." That single word did more damage than Byron understood. He tapped his tablet. "Temporary hold on access credential pending manual verification." Zuri stepped forward. "Do not do that." Byron tapped confirm. The turnstile light above Ronan's code turned amber. Access suspended. Ronan looked at the light, then at Byron. "You have just disabled emergency access during an active technical pre-warning." Byron said, "I have secured my gate." Ronan answered, "No. You have trapped your building behind it." 3 floors above, Gideon Frost stood in the central control room with 30 people watching the final preparation clock. Marjorie Flint, the operations director, stood behind him with Callista Wren from the board. "How long before final stability test?" Marjorie asked. 4 minutes, Gideon said. Zuri raised a pre-warning. "Did you review it?" Gideon gave a quick smile without turning. Zuri is talented, but young engineers sometimes hear thunder in a doorbell. Callista watched him. "Is there a real issue?" "No, auxiliary patch noise. We have run enough simulations." "Where is Zuri now?" Marjorie asked. "Lobby. She went to meet Ronan." Gideon's face tightened. "Dr. Adeyemi is here." "On his way." Gideon looked at the countdown. Gideon said, We cannot delay the board window every time remote architecture wants to inspect a patch. Marjorie frowned. If he is on site, bring him in. Gideon did not answer. The countdown reached 3 minutes. In the lobby, Ronan's phone buzzed. Zuri had sent a screen capture. Final stability test armed. Ronan showed it to Byron. They are about to run it. Then they must be comfortable with their own system, Byron said. Ronan said, they are comfortable because they think I am already on my way upstairs. Byron gave a thin smile. Then maybe you should have arrived looking like someone expected. Zuri reacted. What does that mean? Byron looked at her. It means this is not a side entrance to a repair basement. Ronan lifted one hand, telling Zuri not to spend her breath. Then he spoke into his phone. Zuri, connect me to central control. Byron reached out. No calls inside the security zone. Ronan moved the phone out of reach. You have already blocked system access. Do not block warning communication. Byron signaled to a junior guard named Ellis. Take the phone if he refuses procedure. Ellis hesitated. He had seen Byron wave through executives with expired badges. He had also seen Byron search the same black electrical technician twice in 1 week. Ronan looked at him. Do you want your incident statement to say you stopped the warning call? Ellis stopped. Byron's face reddened. Zuri phone connected to central control. Gideon's voice came through. Zuri, why are you not at your station? Because Dr. Adeyemi is being held at security, Marjorie's voice cut in. Held? Why? Byron spoke loudly toward the phone. Unverified credential. Ronan said, my emergency code is active. Security suspended it without scanning full verification. There was a pause. Then Gideon said, we can proceed with basic test while this is resolved. Ronan's voice sharpened for the first time. Do not run the final stability test. The system is green, Gideon said. It is green because the conflict appears only during the transition from primary load reduction to backup readiness confirmation. We have operator failover. Not if the patch locks the recovery chain, Gideon said. We will manage from inside the room. Ronan looked at Byron. That is the sentence that fails buildings. On the control room screen, the countdown reached 60 seconds. Marjorie said, Gideon, hold the test. Gideon looked at Callista. The assistant operator beside him asked, do you want to cancel? Gideon looked at the green status line, then at the room. Proceed. The command executed. In the lobby, Ronan heard the tone through Zuri's phone. Then came a silence that felt wrong. Byron said, see, nothing happened. Ronan looked at the lobby screen. Wait. 30 seconds passed. The stability test title remained. Then the first warning appeared. Primary load reduction active. Backup readiness confirmation pending. Zuri whispered, it is happening. Ronan said, Nexus is misreading the backup. Green turned yellow. Yellow flashed. Amber lines spread across the building map. Data center isolation pending. Elevator hold preparing. Access zone freeze preparing. Byron stared at the screen. Ronan said, restore my access now. Byron did not move. Ronan turned to Ellis. Manual verification channel. Call operations director. Use my name and emergency code. Ellis looked at Byron. Byron said, stand down. Ellis froze. Then the red lights came on. Not one, all of them. A hard alarm rolled through the lobby. Automatic doors locked. Turnstiles froze. Elevators stopped. A vendor near the coffee stand shouted as the exit gate clicked shut in front of him. The main screen changed. Civic Grid Nexus failure. Recovery chain locked. Chief Engineer override required. The words stayed there, bright red above the gate Byron had used like a throne. Zuri looked at him. There is your verification. Byron's mouth opened, but no sound came. The radio on his shoulder erupted. Security, this is central control. Why is Dr. Adeyemi access suspended? Byron grabbed it. We had a credential irregularity. Marjorie's voice came through sharp enough for the lobby to hear. The credential is the Chief Engineer Emergency Override Authority. Restore access now. Byron swallowed. Ronan held out the code again. Now you may scan it. Byron's hands shook as he lifted the card. The scanner read it in less than 1 second. Dr. Ronan Adeyemi, Chief Engineer, Civic Grid Nexus Core Architect, Emergency Override Authority. Access suspended by Byron Slate at 801. Unauthorized suspension protocol violation. The junior guards read the last line. Zuri read it. The receptionist read it. Byron stared at the screen as if the system had insulted him. Ronan said, "Restore it." The system demanded a reason. Ronan said, "Emergency correction after improper suspension." Byron looked at him. Ronan's voice stayed calm. "Enter it." Byron typed. The amber light turned green. The turnstile opened. The lobby did not cheer. It watched. Ronan stepped through the gate. Then he turned back to Byron. "You did not ask for credentials. You refused to read them." He did not wait for an answer. The elevators were locked in hold mode, so Ronan ran for the stairwell with Zuri behind him. In the lobby, Byron stood beneath the red warning screen, surrounded by witnesses and the log he had created himself. Ellis looked at the security console. Access suspended by Byron Slate. Unauthorized suspension protocol violation. He quietly saved the access log number. Upstairs, the control room had lost its confidence. Gideon entered operator recovery. Denied. He tried secondary failover. Denied. He tried manual zone release. Denied. Each denial appeared faster than the last. Zuri's voice came through the stairwell phone. "We are 2 floors down." Gideon said, "Tell him we need the override sequence." Ronan heard him. "Do not attempt another failover." "Cooling is dropping," Gideon said. "Do not attempt another failover." Marjorie looked at Gideon. "Hands off the console." He hesitated. Marjorie repeated it. "Hands off." This time he obeyed. Ronan reached the control room door at 806. The reader accepted the restored credential. The door opened. Everyone turned. The man Byron had treated like a stranger stepped into the room where every screen was asking for him. Ronan did not waste a second on anger, who was trapped in the elevators. Zuri answered, "2 employees in East Bank Elevator 3, no injury report, server room temperature, rising but not critical. Access zones, research wing B and C, locked wrong state. Lobby exits secured. Backup supply, stable physically. Nexus is reading it unstable because of the patch timing." Ronan opened his laptop at the main console. Gideon said, "We tried operator recovery. I know, it denied us. Because operator recovery now looks like another conflicting command." Gideon's face reddened. Ronan did not look at him. "Move." The word was quiet. Gideon moved. Ronan connected to the engineering interface. The screen asked for Chief Engineer Override. Ronan entered the first key, then stopped. "Zuri, dual confirmation on human safety layer." "Ready?" "Marjorie, pause all non-essential movement commands." "Done." "Gideon, do not touch failover unless I ask." Gideon said nothing. Ronan turned. "Say it." "I will not touch failover unless you ask." "Good." He entered the second key. The manual recovery architecture opened across the wall. Power, cooling, access, elevator hold, data isolation, research wing locks. Callista Wren stood near the back wall, watching the difference between a polished launch and real competence. Ronan spoke as he worked. "We do not reboot the whole system. That traps people longer and risks data isolation loss." He entered a command. "We stabilize backup interpretation first." One red line turned yellow. "We release human-occupied zones before equipment zones." Another command. "We open safe paths, not every door." Zuri confirmed the elevator occupants were stable. Ronan watched the power graph. "Tell them they will feel a short movement and then stop at level 8. Marjorie relayed the message. Ronan entered the command. The elevator icon moved, stopped. Doors open at safe landing, Zuri said. 2 employees out. The room exhaled. Ronan did not. Cooling next. He adjusted load carefully. The server temperature line slowed, then began to fall. Research wing locks. He released B first, then waited, then C. The doors opened in order. Lobby exits. Manual release after cross-check. Zuri confirmed fire system stable. Ronan entered the command. In the lobby, the automatic doors unlocked. People still did not leave. They looked toward Byron. The man he had blocked was opening the building from 3 floors above. In the control room, the main screen shifted from red to amber. Civic Grid Nexus, partial recovery. Gideon whispered, "We are almost clear." Ronan said, "No, we are almost safe. Clear comes after we know why this happened." He opened the auxiliary patch log. There. Zuri leaned closer. Patch changed backup readiness confirmation delay from 3 seconds to 8 seconds. Ronan nodded. During primary load reduction, Nexus expected confirmation at 3. At 8, it treated backup as unstable and locked the recovery chain. Gideon said, "That patch was operational housekeeping." Ronan looked at him. "Housekeeping does not change a safety chain without chief engineer review." The final command went through. The room waited. The main screen turned green. Civic Grid Nexus stable. No one clapped. The green screen did not feel like victory. It felt like proof of how close they had come. Ronan closed the interface and turned to Marjorie. "System is stable. Human risk is resolved. Data center is protected. Now preserve every log from the access gate, control room, auxiliary patch deployment, test authorization, and credential suspension." Marjorie nodded. "Done." Ronan looked at Callista. "And do not let anyone call this a technical glitch." Callista studied him. "What would you call it? A system failure caused by 2 human failures? One at the gate, one in this room." Gideon looked away. Marjorie asked, "Which one first?" Ronan did not hesitate. "The gate, because the system worked there. My credential was valid. The code was active. The emergency list was correct. A person chose not to read it." For a moment, the control room was silent. Then Ronan opened the incident review file and typed the first line. The system did not fail because credentials were missing. It failed because credentials were ignored. The main screen in the control room was green again. The elevators had released. The server temperature was falling. The research wing doors were open. The lobby exits were unlocked. Astrogate had survived the morning. But Ronan Adeyemi knew survival was not the same as safety. Marjorie stood behind him with the operations tablet in both hands. "What do you need first?" "Full preservation," Ronan said. "Of which logs?" "All of them." Gideon Frost shifted near the operator console. "The technical issue is stable now." Ronan turned. "That is why we preserve now, before people start making the story smaller." Gideon looked toward the green screen. "We can document the auxiliary patch conflict." "No." The room went still. Ronan's voice stayed calm. The patch conflict was one failure. The access denial was another. The decision to run final stability test after a warning was a third. If we write only one, the building learns nothing. Callista Wren, the board representative, stepped closer. "Dr. Adeyemi, are you saying this was not only a technical incident?" "I am saying the technology showed us a human incident that was already inside the building." Nobody answered. That was when Lena Orbach entered with the Civic Grid Nexus contract open on her tablet. Lena handled technical agreements, emergency access obligations, and safety compliance. She looked first at Ronan, then at the control room. Anyone injured? No. Anyone still trapped? No. Data loss? None confirmed. Server damage? No. Then she looked at Marjorie. Why was the chief engineer outside the gate when the system required his override? The question had no safe answer. Lena opened the emergency access section and read aloud.
Chief Engineer must have immediate access to Civic Grid Nexus in any red or pre-red technical warning state.
She scrolled. Security may not suspend emergency credentials without two-channel verification from Operations Director or Legal Counsel. She scrolled again.
If identity is disputed, security must scan the presented code, verify against the emergency specialist list, and escalate without delay.
Lena looked up. Dr. Adeyemi, did security scan your code before suspending it? No. Did security call Marjorie? No. Did security call legal? No. Did security verify the emergency specialist list? Zuri Chenoweth answered. I showed Byron the list. He ignored it. Lena turned to Marjorie. Then we do not have a missing credential issue. We have an unauthorized access protocol violation. Byron Slate was brought into the incident room at 10:20. He entered with his shoulders squared, as if posture could still control the room. I hope someone is going to explain why I am being treated like I caused the system failure. Ronan looked at him. You caused an emergency access failure during the system failure. Byron sat down. I did not know who you were. Zuri said, You were told. By an analyst, Byron replied. Lena looked at him. Miss Chenoweth is assigned to Civic Grid Nexus system review. Her information was relevant. My job is to secure the facility. Your job is to verify access according to protocol. Security is not guessing while a scanner is available. Byron leaned back. He came in with an old laptop bag, no escort, no visible executive badge, and a tool pouch. I had every reason to be cautious. Ronan asked, Did my code scan invalid? You did not get scanned. Did my name fail the emergency list? I did not complete that check. Did Marjorie reject my entry? No. Did legal reject my entry? No. Then what credential failed? Byron looked away. Ronan asked again, What credential failed? No answer came. Zuri said, The credential did not fail. Your idea of who belonged in the control room failed. Marjorie closed her eyes for 1 second. She knew that sentence was bigger than Byron. It reached every old complaint that had been filed as confusion. Every delayed technician, every employee told to calm down after being searched twice. Every person who had been forced to prove more because someone at the gate trusted instinct more than data. Lena opened the lobby footage. The screen showed Ronan approaching the checkpoint. Emergency access for central control. It showed Byron joking about a printer. It showed Ronan presenting the access code. It showed Byron holding the code without scanning it. It showed Zuri arriving. This is Dr. Adeyemi. He is the chief engineer for Nexus. It showed Byron pointing toward her tablet. You are an analyst, not security. It showed Ronan warning him. Every minute you delay increases risk. Then it showed Byron tapping the temporary hold. Access suspended. The audio captured the sentence clearly. People like you do not walk into control rooms. The incident room changed, not because people had not heard the words before, because now they were official. Byron stared at the screen. That is not how I meant it. Callista spoke from the wall display. How did you mean it? As a security standard. Lena replayed the sentence. People like you do not walk into control rooms. Then she stopped the video. That is not a standard. That is a judgment. Byron said, "I was under pressure." Ronan answered, "So was the building." The sentence stayed in the room. Ronan did not enjoy it. He had spent his life trying to design systems that protected people when pressure made humans careless. When he was 9 years old, the power failed in the apartment tower where his family lived. The emergency lights died on 2 floors. An elevator stopped between levels with 3 people inside. The ground floor magnetic doors locked in the wrong state because the backup relay had not been tested. His father, Malik Adeyemi, was a residential electrician. He ran through the stairwell with a flashlight and a tool belt, forcing doors open and calming people who thought the building had become a prison. Ronan remembered the sound of fists against elevator metal. "Help us!" Later that night, his father sat at the kitchen table with black dust on his sleeves. Ronan asked why the building locked people inside. Malik said, "Because someone designed it like the building mattered more than the people." Then he said the sentence Ronan carried into every system he ever built. A system is made to serve human beings. When it forgets human beings, it becomes a cage. That was why Ronan had built Civic Grid Nexus with layered recovery. Not because machines were evil, because machines followed what people allowed. If the wrong human decision entered the chain, the system had to leave evidence, and this morning it had. At 11, Lena displayed 2 years of access data connected to Byron's shifts: manual holds, secondary searches, temporary credential suspensions, visitor escalation delays, badge exception handling. Then she filtered by job type: facilities technicians, cleaning staff, junior engineers, contract repair workers, delivery staff. Then she filtered by complaint records and voluntary demographic notes. The pattern appeared without a speech. Employees of color had been held longer. Black technical staff had received more manual credential checks. Latino maintenance workers had been asked to open tool bags more often. White executives with expired badges had been escorted through under familiarity exception. Investors with missing visitor confirmations had been allowed upstairs after 1 phone call. Marjorie whispered, "How did we not see this?" Zuri answered, "Because every complaint was treated as one person being too sensitive." Byron said, "Those numbers do not show context." Lena replied, "Then we will review context." She opened the complaint summaries. Employee reported repeated tool bag search despite valid badge. Disposition: miscommunication. Engineer delayed despite emergency access approval. Disposition: security caution. Technician denied access while executive without current badge was escorted through. Disposition: access confusion. Zuri looked at Byron. "You turned bias into paperwork." Byron snapped, "I kept this facility safe." Ronan looked at the data. "No, you kept certain people feeling watched." Callista asked, "Explain the difference." Ronan turned toward the wall display. Safety reduces risk according to evidence. Bias transfers suspicion onto a group and calls it risk reduction. If a code is invalid, stop the person. If a code is valid, scan it and follow the result. But if one person ignores valid data because the person holding it does not look right to him, the gate becomes less secure, not more secure. Lena added, "And in this case, the less secure gate created physical risk." Gideon had been quiet until Callista turned to him. "Mr. Frost, you ran the final stability test after receiving a warning from Miss Chenoweth and Dr. Adeyemi." Gideon said, "I thought it was minor patch noise." "Did you open the full simulation Zuri sent?" He hesitated. "No." Marjorie turned sharply. "You did not review it?" "I read the summary." Ronan said, "The summary said to hold final stability test until chief engineer review." Gideon looked down. "I believed the team could manage it from inside the room." Ronan answered, "Confidence is not a recovery plan." Callista spoke slowly. Let the minutes show that the board did not ask anyone to run a safety test by ignoring a technical warning. Gideon did not reply. The problem had widened. Byron had blocked the right person. Gideon had ignored the right warning. Astergate had built a building full of sensors and still allowed status to decide which information mattered. Ronan looked at Zuri. You saved the original simulation and message thread. Yes. Good. He turned to Marjorie. She needs protection from retaliation. Marjorie nodded. She will have it. Ronan looked at Gideon. From him too. Gideon swallowed. Yes. At noon, Lena prepared the preliminary violation memo. Unauthorized suspension of chief engineer emergency access. Failure to scan presented credential. Failure to verify emergency specialist list. Failure to escalate identity dispute through operations director or legal. Improper continuation of final stability test after technical warning. Unreviewed auxiliary patch impact on recovery chain. Potential discriminatory access enforcement pattern. Byron stared at the last line. Discriminatory access enforcement pattern. That is not fair. Ronan looked at him. The first time you said people like you, you made it fair to ask who else you meant. Byron had no answer. At 1:15, Marjorie called an emergency board review. The public preview was postponed. The investor walkthrough was canceled. The final stability test was suspended. The incident would be classified as both a technical event and an access governance failure. Marjorie looked at Ronan. Can Nexus run safely tonight? Yes. If the patch is rolled back, the safety chain is verified, and no one runs another test until engineering signs off. Can you supervise? Yes. After what happened, I would understand if you refused. Ronan looked through the glass toward the lobby below. My refusal would punish the people the system is supposed to protect. Marjorie absorbed that. Why stay? Because I do not build systems only for days when people behave well. That was the hardest kind of professionalism. Not loyalty to a company, not forgiveness of Byron, a commitment to the people who could be trapped if Ronan walked away. At 2, Ronan and Zuri began the technical rollback. The mistake was small. A readiness delay had changed from 3 seconds to 8 seconds. The consequence was large. Ronan showed Zuri the line. Systems do not care whether a mistake looks small to the person who made it. Zuri nodded. What is the second lesson? People are systems too. She looked up. Meaning. They have inputs, defaults, overrides, failure modes, and logs if the organization bothers to keep them. Zuri looked toward the lobby camera feed. Byron default was bias. Ronan said, bias plus authority becomes infrastructure. She wrote the sentence down. At 3:30, Lena read the lobby transcript into the formal review. Byron Slate, show your credentials. Dr. Ronan Adeyemi. The credential is in the system. Byron Slate, people like you do not walk into control rooms. Ronan kept his eyes on the table. He had heard worse in his life, but hearing the line read into a formal record was different. Words that used to disappear now had weight. Callista asked, Dr. Adeyemi, do you want to add a personal statement? Ronan almost said no. He had work to do. He always had work to do. Then he remembered his father with black dust on his sleeves. He remembered fists against elevator metal. He remembered the lesson that a system becomes a cage when it forgets human beings. Yes, he said. Lena nodded. Ronan spoke slowly. I was not harmed because security asked for credentials. Security should verify credentials. I was harmed because valid credentials were placed in front of security and refused because I did not match one-man image of authority. The building was harmed for the same reason. It had the correct data, and a human gatekeeper rejected it. He paused. When a system ignores true data, failure is not a surprise. It is a schedule. No one interrupted. He continued, "Do not reduce this to hurt feelings. I did not need Byron Slate to like me. I needed him to scan the code." The statement ended there. It was enough. At 4:45, Byron Slate was suspended from security duty pending investigation. His access authority was revoked. He could not contact Ronan, Zuri, Ellis, or any staff connected to prior security complaints. Security leadership was ordered to preserve all access denial records from the past 2 years. Byron read the notice. Then he looked at Ronan. "If I had known you were the chief engineer, I would have opened the gate." Ronan answered, "That is the problem." Byron frowned. "Your job was not to respect my title. Your job was to verify my credential." "I was doing my job." "No, you performed judgment and called it security." Byron looked away. For the first time, he had no stronger sentence ready. At 5:30, Gideon Frost received his notice. Temporary removal from Final Stability Test Authority. Review of all unaddressed technical warnings. Mandatory reporting of junior engineer escalations. No test execution without chief engineer confirmation until board review was complete. Gideon walked to Zuri afterward. "I should have opened your simulation." Zuri looked at him. "Yes, I am sorry." "I believe you are sorry now. I need to know you will listen before the screen turns red." Gideon nodded. "That was not forgiveness. That was a condition." By 6, the patch had been rolled back. Zuri verified the readiness timing. Ronan confirmed the safety chain. Marjorie signed the test suspension. Callista notified the board that Astrogate would not hide the incident behind the words "technical glitch." The building had stopped pretending. Ronan finally stepped outside after dark. The same gate that had refused him opened when his credential passed the scanner. He stopped before walking through. Zuri stood beside him. "You are not leaving for good, are you?" "No." "Good." Ronan looked at the empty security chair. "Tomorrow will be worse. The system is stable. The technology is stable. Then what is worse? Tomorrow people will decide whether the truth is too expensive to keep." Zuri understood. Bad launch story, board embarrassment, contract violation, security discrimination, leadership failure, all of it. Ronan nodded. A building can recover in minutes. An organization takes longer because it has to want to. Behind them, the lobby footage uploaded to the board evidence folder. The gate Byron had controlled for years was no longer only a checkpoint. It was a witness. By 8 the next morning, the board evidence folder had been opened more times than the technical incident file. That told Ronan Adeyemi everything. People wanted to understand the outage. They wanted to survive the access footage. Astrogate Technology Complex was supposed to present Civic Grid Nexus as the safest control architecture in the region. The expansion wing had been scheduled for a public preview. Investors were arriving that week. A technology magazine had already prepared a feature about intelligent infrastructure and human-centered automation. Then the intelligent building had locked its own chief engineer outside because one man at the gate refused to scan a valid code. Marjorie Flint called the emergency executive session at 8:30. The room was full before Ronan arrived. Marjorie sat at one end with the operations report open. Callista Wren represented the board. Lena Orbach sat with the contract. Gideon Frost sat without his control room badge. Zuri Chenoweth sat beside Ronan, not behind him. Byron Slate was present with a representative and no access authority. The public relations director, Simon Vale, stood near the screen with the tired confidence of a man who believed words could keep facts obedient. He began too quickly. "We need to separate the technical event from the personnel issue." Ronan placed his laptop on the table. They were not separate. Simon smiled in a careful way.
Dr. Adeyemi, I respect your perspective. But public communication requires containment. Containment is for hazards, Ronan said, not truth. The room quieted. Simon looked toward Marjorie. We cannot describe this as a discrimination-driven access failure in the first statement. It will overwhelm the safety message. Zuri spoke before Ronan could. It was the safety message. Simon turned. Miss Chenoweth, I understand this is personal for you. No, Zuri said. It was operational. The chief engineer could not access the system because security refused to verify his credential. That is not separate from safety. Callista nodded once. Continue, Miss Chenoweth. Zuri looked down at her notes. The recovery delay was not caused by lack of tools. It was caused by blocking the person authorized to use them. Gideon shifted. We still recovered without injury. Ronan turned to him. After unnecessary lockout, elevator hold, rising server temperature, and research wing access failure,
Gideon said, but no one was hurt. Ronan's voice stayed level. That is not a defense. That is luck asking to be mistaken for competence. No one moved. Marjorie wrote the sentence down. Simon tried again. We need a statement that says Astergate experienced a temporary stability interruption during final testing and immediately restored normal operations. Lena looked up. That statement is incomplete. Simon exhaled. Legal always thinks everything is incomplete. Lena opened the contract file. Security suspended emergency chief engineer access without required verification. Operations ran a final stability test after a documented pre-warning. Control room management ignored a written hold request. If our statement omits those facts, it is not incomplete. It is misleading. Simon sat down. Callista turned to Ronan. Dr. Adeyemi, what should the first internal finding say? Ronan looked at the room. The incident was caused by a technical patch conflict made dangerous by human decision failures. Which human decisions? Failure to verify valid emergency credentials. Failure to escalate an identity dispute. Failure to hold final stability test after safety warning. Failure to treat prior access complaints as data. Byron leaned forward. Prior complaints are not part of the outage. Ronan looked at him. They explain why you felt safe ignoring the scanner. Byron's face tightened. I made a judgment call. Lena replied, the procedure did not ask for your judgment first. It asked for verification. Byron said, people can fake codes. Ronan asked, can they fake a live scan against the emergency specialist list? Byron did not answer. Ronan continued. The code existed to remove guesswork. You chose guesswork. Byron looked toward Callista. This is being twisted. Callista said, then untwist it with records. Byron opened his mouth. Nothing came. Lena turned to the screen. Show the access comparison. A chart appeared. Manual holds by security lead. Byron Slate was above every other morning lead. Secondary bag checks. Byron Slate again. Average delay by employee category. Technical staff of color were delayed almost 3 times longer than executive visitors. Credential suspension events. More than half involved Byron. Prior complaints marked as miscommunication. 17. Security caution. 9. Access confusion. 11. Marjorie stared at the numbers. 17 miscommunications. Zuri said, that was only the word used to close them. Lena opened one complaint. Electrical technician delayed 3 times in 1 week despite valid badge. Disposition. Miscommunication. She opened another. Research engineer asked whether she was delivering food while presenting employee identification. Disposition. Access confusion. Another. Cleaning supervisor searched after white contractor with expired badge was escorted through. Disposition. Security caution. Byron said, "Those are taken out of context." Ronan asked, "Then why does the context keep landing on the same people?" The answer did not come from Byron. It came from Ellis, the junior guard who had been at the gate. He stood near the wall, having been asked to attend as a witness. Byron turned to him. "Do not get dragged into this." Lena looked at Byron. "That is enough." Ellis swallowed. "I saved the access log number yesterday because I knew the suspension was wrong." Byron stared at him. Ellis continued, "It was not the first time. We all knew who got checked harder. We just called it Byron being Byron." Ronan closed his eyes for a moment. There it was, the phrase that lets a system keep failing. Byron being Byron. Not policy, not bias, not danger. A personality quirk everyone worked around until the day it became structural risk. Callista looked at Ellis. "Why did no one report it as a pattern?" Ellis said, "People did report pieces of it, but if the complaint was about tone, it died. If it was about extra checking, it became caution.
If it was about race, people stopped saying race because they were told it made the report emotional." Zuri looked at the table. Ronan did not speak. He wanted the room to hear someone else say it. Marjorie looked ashamed. "I signed some of those closures." Lena said, "Operations did." Marjorie nodded. "I did." That mattered, not because shame fixed the system, because denial would have broken it further. Gideon tried to redirect. "This still does not change the technical root cause. The auxiliary patch was the trigger." Ronan turned to him. "Who approved the auxiliary patch?" Gideon paused. "Operations maintenance queue." "Who reviewed it against the safety chain?" "It was labeled minor." "Who reviewed it?" No one answered. Ronan looked at Marjorie. "There is your second system." Marjorie said, "Explain." "A patch that touches timing in the backup readiness signal cannot be minor during a stability test. The label allowed it to bypass review. Then Zuri caught it. Gideon dismissed it.
Byron blocked the only person who could verify it before test. He looked at Gideon. Every layer had a chance to stop the failure. Gideon sat very still. Callista asked, "Miss Chenoweth, did you send the warning in time?" "Yes." "Did you send the simulation file?" "Yes." "Did you request test hold?" "Yes." "Did anyone ask you for clarification before proceeding?" "No." Callista looked at Gideon. "Why not?" Gideon answered softly, "I thought we could manage it." Ronan said, "You thought authority was a substitute for review." Gideon looked up. "That is not fair." "It is accurate." Simon, the public relations director, rubbed his forehead. "We cannot put all of this in one message." Callista replied, "We are not asking you to write a marketing message. We are determining what happened." Simon said, "Investors will panic." Callista looked at him. "They should be more worried if we hide the reason a control system failed during a safety test." The room shifted again. The board was no longer asking how to shrink the story. It was asking whether the institution could become honest enough to survive it. At 10:20, Lena opened the contract violations section. If Chief Engineer Emergency Access is obstructed without required verification during a red or pre-red warning, Astrogate may be in serious breach of operational safety obligations. Marjorie asked, "Maybe?" Lena looked at Byron, then Gideon.
The review will determine final classification, but the evidence supports serious breach analysis. Byron whispered to his representative. Gideon stared at the table. Marjorie asked, "Consequences?" Mandatory board reporting, possible delay of expansion certification, insurance notification, independent safety audit, review of security governance, potential personnel discipline, contract cure plan. Simon looked pale. Expansion certification delay could cost millions. Ronan said, "So could a locked building with people inside." No one disputed that. At 11, the independent safety consultant joined by secure video.
Her name was Dr. Helena Rusk. She had reviewed the preliminary package in silence. When she spoke, she did not soften the room. Astergate has a common high-reliability problem. It built redundancy into machines, but not into human authority. One security lead could suspend critical access. One control room manager could proceed after a warning. One operations chain could classify a timing patch as minor. These are single points of failure. Ronan nodded. Exactly. Helena continued. The technology worked well enough to preserve logs. Your governance did not work well enough to respect them before failure. Marjorie asked, "What do you recommend?" Immediate suspension of final stability testing. Independent review of all emergency access controls. Removal of single-person credential suspension authority for emergency roles. Retrospective audit of access denials. Mandatory escalation when technical staff issue safety holds. Protection for reporters. And a board-level human safety review. Callista wrote quickly. Byron objected. You are redesigning security because of one bad morning. Helena looked at him. No, we are redesigning security because the data says the morning was not alone. The room went quiet again. Byron had no answer for data. He had spent years making people defend feelings. Now he had numbers, footage, audio, logs, and a chief engineer statement in front of him. At noon, Astergate issued its first internal notice. Not public, internal. It named the incident as a Civic Grid Nexus stability event, involving access governance failure and test authorization failure. It ordered all staff to preserve relevant records. It invited employees to resubmit prior access complaints through an independent channel. It confirmed that no retaliation would be allowed against Zuri, Ellis, Ronan, or any employee who participated in review. Within 40 minutes, the independent channel received 14 messages. By 1:30, it had 23. Some were small. A second badge check, a joke at a checkpoint, a delivery assumption, a tool bag search, a delay that made someone late enough to be blamed by a supervisor. Small things. But small things become a system when they happen to the same people in the same places under the same authority. Marjorie read the summaries with her jaw tight. I thought we had a complaint process. Ronan said, You had a complaint storage process. She looked at him. That hurts. It should. He did not say it cruelly. He said it like an engineer telling a room the pressure gauge was in the red. At 2:15, Byron gave a revised statement. This time, counsel sat beside him. He admitted he did not scan the credential before suspension. He admitted Zuri identified Ronan. He admitted he heard Ronan warn that delay increased risk. But he would not admit bias. I was protecting the control room, he said. Lena asked, From what? Unauthorized entry. Based on what failed verification? He paused. Presentation? Ronan looked up. Presentation. Byron said, he did not present like a chief engineer. The room heard it. A cleaner version of people like you. Callista leaned forward. Mr. Slate, what does a chief engineer present like? Byron realized the trap after stepping inside it. He did not answer. Callista said, Let the record show that the witness cannot define the standard he claims to have enforced. Byron's face turned red. At 3, Gideon gave his revised statement. He admitted he did not open Zuri's full simulation before running the test. He admitted he heard Ronan warning through Zuri's phone. He admitted Marjorie said to hold the test before he proceeded. The last admission made Marjorie look up. Gideon said, "I believed a delay would damage the board confidence in the system." Callista answered, "Ignoring a safety warning damaged it more." Gideon nodded. Yes. Ronan watched him carefully. The yes mattered. It was late, but it was not nothing. At 4, Ronan and Zuri returned to the control room for verification testing. Not the public test, a private safety chain review. They ran the corrected timing, primary load reduction, backup readiness confirmation. 3 seconds, stable. They ran the delayed timing in isolation. 8 seconds, pre-lock warning. They added a new guardrail. Any backup readiness delay above 5 seconds would trigger engineering review before recovery chain isolation. Zuri confirmed. That would have prevented lock. Ronan said, "It would have slowed it long enough for a human to think." Zuri looked toward the gate camera feed. "If the human thinks," Ronan said, "then we build systems that force the pause." At 5:30, Marjorie called Ronan, Zuri, Lena, and Callista into a smaller room. The board had made interim decisions. Byron remained suspended pending termination review. Security leadership was placed under independent review. Gideon remained removed from test authority. Final stability testing paused for 10 days. Expansion preview delayed. Human Safety Review Board to be created immediately. Access denial audit to cover 2 years. Emergency Credential Suspension Authority removed from single guard control. Ronan listened. Then he asked, "Who chairs the Human Safety Review Board?" Marjorie said, "I was going to ask you." "No." She looked surprised. "No. Why?" "Because if I chair it, everyone will treat this as Ronan issue. It is not." "Then who?" Ronan looked at Zuri. "She should be on it. Not as a symbol, as someone who saw the technical warning and the human warning." Zuri blinked. "Me?" Ronan said, "You saw both systems fail?" Callista nodded. "Agreed." Zuri sat straighter. Marjorie wrote it down. At 6:12, the internal notice went out. Zuri Chenoweth appointed interim technical representative to Human Safety Review Board. Ronan asked for one more change. Add Ellis, the junior guard. Yes. Why? Because the gate cannot be redesigned only by people who never stand at it. Callista smiled slightly, approved. At 7, Ronan walked through the lobby again. This time, nobody stopped him. That was not enough. A gate that respects one famous engineer after an incident has not changed. A gate changes when it respects the unknown technician tomorrow. Ellis stood at the security desk. "Dr. Adeyemi." Ronan stopped. "Yes, I should have acted sooner yesterday." "Yes." Ellis accepted it. "I saved the log, but I froze at the gate." Ronan said, "Saving the log mattered. Freezing mattered too. Learn from both." Ellis nodded. "Can I ask something?" "Yes." "How did you stay calm when Byron said that?" Ronan looked toward the turnstiles. "I did not stay calm because it did not hurt. I stayed calm because the building still needed me." Ellis looked down. "That is a heavy way to live." Ronan answered, "It is. That is why systems should not require it from people." He walked out into the evening. Behind him, Astergate remained lit, stable, and quiet. But inside its evidence folder, the truth was no longer quiet. The next day would decide whether the organization changed. Not because the screen had turned red, because the record had. By 9 the next morning, Astorgate stopped treating the incident as a bad launch day and began treating it as a governance failure. That was the first real shift. Not the red lights, not the locked doors, not the elevators holding between floors. The shift came when Callista Wren opened the board review with one sentence. "We will not call this a technical glitch to protect a reputation that the facts no longer support." Simon Vale, the public communications director, looked as if someone had taken away his favorite tool. Marjorie Flint sat beside Lena Orbach with the contract file open. Zuri Chenoweth sat at the table as interim technical representative to the new Human Safety Review Board. Ellis Moore, the junior guard who had saved the access log, sat beside security leadership. Ronan Adeyemi sat across from Byron Slate, not because he wanted to be there, but because systems did not change when the people harmed by them were asked to disappear after the emergency. Byron arrived with representation and the same stiff posture. Gideon Frost arrived without control room authority. The screen behind Callista showed 3 files: Technical Chain Review, Access Governance Review, Prior Complaint Audit. Callista said, "We begin with the gate." Byron looked down. Lena opened the access event timeline. 7:45. Dr. Ronan Adeyemi listed as Emergency Override Authority. 7:59. Dr. Adeyemi arrived at main security checkpoint. 8:00. Emergency access code presented. 8:01. Security lead Byron Slate suspended the credential without full scan. 8:02. System test proceeded after verbal warning. 8:05. Civic Grid Nexus entered recovery chain lock. 8:06. Credential restored after operations intervention. 8:07. Dr. Adeyemi entered control room and began recovery. Callista looked at Byron. Which step in that timeline complied with protocol? Byron shifted. "I believed the credential needed manual verification." Lena replied, "Manual verification begins with scanning the code. You did not scan. I saw irregular presentation." Ronan asked, "What is irregular presentation?" Byron looked at him. "You know what I mean." "No," Ronan said. "I want the room to hear the standard you used." Byron's face tightened. "No escort, no visible badge, tool pouch, old laptop bag." Zuri said, "None of those invalidate an emergency code." Byron said, "They raise concern." Ellis spoke quietly. "Only for some people." The room turned toward him. Ellis swallowed, then continued. "I worked the gate with Mr. Slate for 18 months. Executives forgot badges and got waved through after one phone call. Investors got visitor passes before confirmation finished. Contractors with expensive jackets got a softer tone. Technicians with tool bags got held." Byron turned sharply. "That is not true." Ellis looked at the screen. "The logs show it is true." Lena opened the comparison. Same month, 2 expired executive badges cleared under familiarity exception. 3 black facilities employees manually held despite valid badges. 1 investor guest cleared with incomplete calendar data. 1 Latino network technician delayed 18 minutes while his tool pouch was searched twice. 1 Asian research engineer asked whether she was delivery staff. Each event had a closing note: miscommunication, security caution, access confusion. Zuri said, "Those words did the hiding." Marjorie lowered her eyes. Lena continued, "Mr. Slate, did you receive corrective coaching after any of these complaints?" Byron said, "I received reminders." "Were any complaints escalated for pattern review?" "No." "Why?" Security leadership had discretion. Callista looked at Security Director Owen Marr, Mr. Marr, who reviewed Byron Slate's discretion. Owen sat very still. "I did. And did you review these as a pattern?" No. Why not? They were closed as individual misunderstandings. Ronan looked at the rows of data. A cage is often built one small bar at a time. No one wrote that down. They did not need to. The room felt it. Callista moved to the technical chain. Gideon Frost straightened. Lena opened the sequence. Auxiliary patch labeled minor. No chief engineer review. Zuri warning sent. Simulation attached. Hold request sent. Ronan. Hold instructions sent from transit. Final stability test proceeded. Recovery chain locked. Gideon said, "I have accepted that I should have reviewed the simulation." Ronan replied, "This is not only about accepting regret. It is about removing the conditions that made your regret predictable." Gideon looked up. Ronan continued,
A junior engineer should not have to win a personality contest to stop a risky test. A chief engineer should not have to already be in the room for a hold instruction to matter. A board schedule should not outrank a safety chain. Callista asked, "What rule prevents this next time?" Zuri answered before Ronan. Any technical safety hold connected to power transition, access control, server cooling, elevator logic, fire zone routing, or recovery chain must pause the test until reviewed by the assigned engineering authority. Ronan nodded. And the system should enforce it, not just the people. Zuri added, "If a safety hold is active, the test console should require documented override from chief engineer and operations director together." Gideon said, "That will slow operations." Ronan looked at him. Yes. The room absorbed the single word. Some speed was only danger that had not yet found a victim. At 11, Dr. Helena Rusk, the independent safety consultant, delivered her preliminary finding by secure video. Astergate has excellent machine logging and weak human accountability logging. The building knows when a door locks. It knows when a server warms. It knows when a code is suspended. But leadership did not regularly ask who was being stopped, who was being waved through, whose warnings were ignored, and whose authority was doubted. That is not a technology gap. That is a governance gap. Marjorie asked, "What is the required cure plan?" Helena listed it plainly. 1. Emergency credentials cannot be suspended by a single security lead. 2. Any disputed emergency credential triggers automatic escalation to operations and legal. 3. All access denials must record reason, duration, reviewer, and outcome. 4. Monthly access equity audit must compare manual holds, searches, delays, and exceptions. 5. Safety hold authority must be available to junior engineers with documented evidence. 6. Final stability tests require open warnings to be cleared by engineering authority. 7. Prior complaints must be reopened by independent review. 8. Retaliation protection must apply to Ronan Adeyemi, Zuri Chenoweth, Ellis Moore, and all prior complainants. Byron muttered, "So now anyone can claim bias and stop security." Ronan turned to him. "No. Anyone can present data and require review. That is what you refuse to do." Callista looked at Byron. "Mr. Slate, you keep defending instinct. The issue is that your instinct overruled the system." Byron looked at the screen showing the green credential after restoration. Emergency Override Authority. Unauthorized suspension protocol violation. The words had become his own locked door. At noon, the board issued interim consequences. Byron Slate remained suspended pending termination review. His credential authority was revoked. Every access denial he handled in 2 years would be audited. Security Director Owen Marr was placed under administrative review for failure to detect and escalate the pattern.
Gideon Frost remained removed from Stability Test Authority pending technical governance training and board review. Astergate public preview stayed canceled. Expansion certification was delayed until independent safety review confirmed the cure plan. Simon Vale stared at the last line. Certification delay will hurt. Callista replied, certification without trust would hurt more. Marjorie looked at Ronan. What do you need to keep Nexus safe during the delay? Ronan said, engineering authority without performance pressure. Zuri on all safety chain reviews. A daily open warning report. No manual access change to emergency roles without dual approval. And a board commitment that no one calls this over because the screen is green. Callista nodded. Granted. Byron stood. So he gets everything now. Ronan did not move. No. The system gets what it should have had yesterday. Byron looked around the room for support. No one gave it. That silence was different from the lobby silence. The lobby silence had been fear. This silence was withdrawal. The room was no longer protecting him. At 2, Astergate opened the prior complaint review channel to all employees, contractors, and former staff from the past 3 years. By 3:30, 36 submissions had arrived. By 5, there were 51. A black elevator technician wrote that he carried printed work orders because Byron often said his digital ticket looked suspicious. A Latina fiber contractor wrote that her tool case had been searched in public, while 2 men from another vendor walked through unchecked. A South Asian research fellow wrote that Byron asked whether she was lost while she was wearing a valid badge. A night cleaning supervisor wrote that his team learned to arrive 20 minutes early because security delays were normal for them, but not for day shift visitors. One complaint included a sentence that stayed with Marjorie. We stopped reporting because every report came back as confusion, and after a while, confusion felt like policy. Marjorie read it twice. Then she sent a message to Callista. I am responsible for letting confusion become policy. Callista replied, then be responsible for ending it. That evening, Ronan and Zuri ran the first corrected safety chain simulation. No investors, no board applause, no launch music. Only engineers, logs, and a test that could be stopped without anyone losing face. Zuri activated the revised backup readiness timing. Primary load reduced. Backup supply confirmed. Recovery chain remained open. Elevator logic normal. Access doors normal. Server cooling stable. Then she injected the delayed confirmation. The system paused automatically. Safety hold active. Chief Engineer and Operations Review required. Zuri looked at Ronan. That is the pause we needed yesterday. Ronan nodded. A pause can save a building if people respect it. She glanced toward the lobby camera. And if they respect the person asking for it. Yes. Marjorie entered quietly as the simulation ended. I read the new complaints. Ronan did not answer. She said, I owe people more than apologies. Yes, I know. Then start with repair, not language. Marjorie looked at the safety hold screen. What does repair look like tomorrow? Ronan answered, restore people records, remove false complaint closures, review discipline caused by access delays, pay contractors for documented time lost at the gate, retrain security with data, replace leaders who treated pattern as personality, and keep publishing the audit internally, even after headlines fade. Zuri added, and give junior engineers authority to stop tests without being punished. Marjorie wrote it down. At 7:15, Byron requested a private conversation with Ronan. Lena advised against it unless recorded. Ronan agreed to a monitored room. Byron entered without the old posture. His representative sat beside him. Ronan sat across the table with Lena present. Byron began. If I had known you were the chief engineer, I would have handled it differently. Ronan said, You already told me that. I am trying to apologize. No, you are explaining when you would have behaved better. Byron's hands clenched. What do you want me to say? The truth. Byron looked toward Lena. She said nothing. Ronan continued. You did not mistrust the credential. You mistrusted the person carrying it. Byron's jaw tightened. I have worked security for years. People try things. Yes, that is why verification exists. I made a mistake. You made a decision. Byron looked down. The room waited. Finally, he said, I did not think someone like you was the person they would call for that room. There it was, not polished, not protected, not hidden under security caution. Ronan nodded once. Now we are closer to the truth. Byron looked up. Does that help me? No. Then why make me say it? Because a system cannot correct a failure it refuses to name. Byron had no answer. The monitored statement was added to the review file. By 8, Marjorie finalized the first public statement. It was shorter than Simon wanted and more honest than he feared. Astrogate Technology Complex experienced a Civic Grid Nexus stability event during final testing. The event was resolved without injury or data loss. Preliminary review shows that a technical patch conflict was made more serious by failures in access verification and test authorization. Astrogate has delayed its expansion preview, appointed an independent safety reviewer, suspended involved personnel authority, and begun a full audit of emergency access procedures and prior access complaints. We will not call a governance failure a technical glitch. Simon read the final sentence. This is blunt, Callista said. Good. Investors will ask questions. We finally have answers worth giving. The statement went out at 8:15. By 8:20, calls began. By 9, reporters had the line. We will not call a governance failure a technical glitch. By 9:30, employees were sharing it with messages of their own. One technician wrote, Finally. One former contractor wrote, I still have the old denial emails. One engineer wrote, Zuri was right. Zuri saw that one and set her phone down. Ronan noticed. You are all right. She nodded. I thought I wanted people to say I was right, and now I wish they had listened when being right still mattered. Ronan looked at the green system screen. That is why we build the pause. The next morning, Byron was terminated for violation of emergency access protocol, misuse of credential suspension authority, and conduct inconsistent with safety and dignity standards. Security Director Owen Marr resigned after the independent review found repeated failure to examine patterns in complaints. Gideon Frost was not fired. Not yet. But he was removed from control room leadership pending retraining, probation, and board review. He accepted the finding that he ignored a technical warning because of schedule pressure and status bias. The phrase status bias surprised him. He asked Ronan about it. I did not think less of Zuri. Ronan answered, You treated her warning as less urgent because of where she sat in the hierarchy. Gideon looked ashamed. I thought experience mattered. Experience matters, but evidence matters more. Gideon nodded. I have to learn that before I lead again. Yes. That yes was not cruel. It was a requirement. 2 weeks later, the new access protocol went live. At the main gate, every security station displayed the same rule: verify before judgment. Emergency credentials could no longer be suspended by one guard. If a disputed emergency code appeared, the system automatically notified operations, legal, and the assigned technical authority. Manual holds required a reason selected from a controlled list and a written note. Every manual hold generated a review entry. Every week, security leadership received a pattern report. Who was stopped? Who was searched? Who was delayed?
Who was waved through? Which reasons were used? Which guards used them most? Which complaints returned? The data would not make people unbiased, but it would make bias harder to hide. Ronan insisted on one final sign at the gate. Credentials are verified by data. Dignity is not up for inspection. Marjorie approved it. Simon said it might sound accusatory. Callista answered, "It is only accusatory to people who need the warning." On the day the sign was installed, Ronan stood in the lobby beside Zuri and Ellis. People walked through differently. Some glanced at the sign. Some pretended not to. One older maintenance worker stopped and read it twice. Then he looked at Ronan. "About time." Ronan said, "Yes, about time." The building did not become perfect, no system does. But the gate no longer belonged to one-man instinct. The control room no longer treated junior warnings as background noise. The board no longer accepted green screens as proof of safety. And Astergate had learned the lesson Ronan's father had taught him years before. A system built for people must never become a cage for them. That night, Ronan stayed after the lobby emptied. He placed his hand on the scanner. The light turned green. The gate opened. No speech, no apology, no permission from Byron. Only the system finally doing what it should have done the first time. It read the truth before judging the person carrying it. That was the sentence Ronan Adeyemi wrote at the bottom of the final access protocol report. Not as poetry, as a requirement. By the end of the first month, the gate at Astergate Technology Complex no longer worked the way Byron Slate had trained it to work. No guard could suspend emergency access alone. No manual hold could disappear into vague language. No complaint could be closed as confusion without review. No security instinct could override a live credential without leaving a record that leadership had to read. Every week, the new Access Review Report went to Operations, Legal, Security Leadership, and the Human Safety Review Board. Who was stopped? Who was searched? Who was delayed? Who was waved through? How long they waited? What reason was used? Which security officer made the decision? Which complaint returned? The first report was uncomfortable. The second was worse. The third began to change behavior. Some guards became defensive. Some became careful. A few became better. Ellis Moore was one of them. He had frozen at the gate when Byron ordered him to stand down.
But he had saved the access log number. That one act did not erase his hesitation. It gave him something to build from. During the new training, he stood in front of the security team with shaking hands and said, "I thought my job was to follow the lead officer. Now I understand my job is to follow the protocol when the lead officer is wrong." No one clapped. They listened. That was better. Zuri Chenoweth became the youngest member of the Human Safety Review Board. At first, some senior engineers treated her appointment as symbolic. They were polite in the way powerful rooms are polite when they have not decided to listen yet. Zuri noticed. Ronan noticed too. In the first board meeting, a senior systems manager called her perspective valuable, then moved to the next item without asking for her analysis. Ronan looked at him. "You skipped the person who caught the failure before everyone else." The manager flushed. I assumed she agreed. Ronan said, "Assumption is what brought us here." Zuri opened her tablet. The revised safety chain is stable, but the override approval flow still depends on two people being awake, available, and willing to answer. We need an automatic escalation ladder after 60 seconds, then board-level notification after 3 minutes if the credential dispute involves emergency access. The room went silent. Callista Wren leaned forward. "Add it to the protocol." The manager did not interrupt her again. Gideon Frost spent 90 days away from control room leadership. He attended technical governance training. He reviewed every warning he had dismissed in the last year. He met with Zuri, not to ask for forgiveness, but to understand what his hierarchy had filtered out. One afternoon, he brought her a list. "These are 11 warnings from junior engineers that I closed without full review." Zuri looked at the file. "Why bring this to me?" "Because I think some of them may show the same pattern." They sat together for 2 hours. Not friends, not enemies. 2 engineers looking at the cost of ignored signals. At the end, Gideon said, "I used to think experience meant knowing when not to panic." Zuri answered, "Experience should also mean knowing when a younger engineer is seeing something you missed." Gideon nodded. "I am learning that late." "Late is not useless," Zuri said, "unless you call it done." Byron did not learn as quickly. After termination, he filed a complaint claiming Astergate had sacrificed him to protect executives. The review board answered with records: the access suspension log, the lobby audio, the complaint pattern, the credential protocol, the monitored statement where he admitted he did not think someone like Ronan was the person they would call for the control room. Byron later sent one letter to Ronan through counsel. It was short. "If I had understood the situation, I would not have handled it that way." Ronan read it once, then placed it in the file. Zuri asked if he would respond. No. Why not? Because he still thinks the situation was the problem. What was the problem? Ronan looked through the control room glass at the lobby below. He did not understand that my dignity was not created by the emergency. Marjorie Flint changed more than policy. She reopened every old access complaint from the past 3 years. Some records were corrected. Some contractors were paid for documented time lost because of improper delays. 2 employees had disciplinary notes removed after review showed they had been late because of unsupported gate holds. Security performance reviews were changed to include accuracy, pattern awareness, and complaint handling. Astergate also created a rule that every employee, contractor, and emergency specialist had the right to ask, what did the system verify before accepting a security denial? That sentence spread quickly. What did the system verify? It became a shield, not against real security, against lazy authority. 1 month after the incident, Astergate ran the final stability test again. No investors, no cameras, no public preview, only engineers, safety reviewers, operations staff, and board observers. Ronan stood behind Zuri this time. She led the safety chain verification, primary load reduction, backup supply readiness, server cooling response, elevator logic, access zone routing, emergency credential dispute simulation. The test created a false credential conflict on purpose. The gate scanner read the emergency code. Automatic escalation went to operations, legal, and technical authority. The guard could not suspend access alone. The system displayed one instruction: verify before judgment. Zuri looked back at Ronan. The pause worked. Ronan nodded. The building is learning. The test completed without lockout. The main screen turned green. Civic Grid Nexus stable. This time, people did clap. Not loudly, not like a celebration, like relief finally becoming sound. Ronan did not clap. He watched the access log. The truth was not the green screen. The truth was the record underneath it. 1 year later, Astergate opened its control room to a group of public school students from the same kind of neighborhood Ronan had grown up in. The program was called Systems That Serve People. Ronan had rejected 3 polished names before approving that one. No Future Leaders Summit. No Innovation Excellence Showcase. Systems That Serve People. The students arrived with wide eyes, borrowed blazers, sneakers, backpacks, and the careful silence of young people trying to decide whether a place expects them to belong. At the gate, Ellis greeted them. He scanned each visitor code the same way. No jokes, no assumptions, no looking at one student longer than another. He explained the process. This gate verifies access by data. It does not decide your worth. If anyone ever stops you in a technical facility, you have the right to ask what the system verified. A girl near the front asked, "What if they get mad?" Ellis glanced toward Ronan, Then he answered, "Then the system should record that too." Ronan smiled slightly. Progress sometimes sounded like a guard teaching the rule he once failed to defend. Inside the control room, Zuri showed the students the recovery map. Power, cooling, elevators, access doors, sensors, server protection, human safety layer. A boy raised his hand. "Why is human safety a layer? Is that not the point of everything?" Zuri looked at Ronan. Ronan said, "It should be, but systems need reminders because people forget what they are building for." He told them about the apartment tower from his childhood. He did not make it dramatic. He told it plainly. Power failed, lights died, elevators stuck, doors locked wrong. People pounded on metal. His father came home with black dust on his sleeves and said a system becomes a cage when it forgets human beings. The students listened. One girl asked, "Is that why you became an engineer?"
Yes, to build better cages.
Ronan shook his head, to stop calling cages smart. That answer stayed with them. Later, near the main console, a black boy named Malik raised his hand. "If someone at the gate does not believe I belong here, what should I do?" The room went quiet. Ronan walked closer to him. "First, know why you are there. Second, keep your credentials. Third, learn the system better than the person trying to keep you outside it. But the most important answer is this. We should build systems where one person at a gate cannot decide your value with his eyes." Malik looked at the control screens. "Do you think I could be a chief engineer?" Ronan answered, "You could design a system that one day a chief engineer has to learn from." The boy smiled before he could hide it. That was the moment Ronan had stayed for. Not the board apology, not the public statement, not Byron removal. That smile. The small opening in a young person's mind where a locked door used to be. After the student tour, Marjorie found Ronan in the lobby. The new sign had been installed above the main checkpoint. "Credentials are verified by data. Dignity is not up for inspection." She stood beside him. "I used to think that sign was too direct." Ronan said, "It is direct because the failure was direct. Now I think it may be the most important system we installed." "No." She looked at him. "No. The most important system is the audit that tells you whether the sign is true." Marjorie nodded slowly. She understood him better now. Words on a wall could become decoration. Data made them accountable. Callista arrived a few minutes later with the first annual Human Safety Review Board report. She handed Ronan a copy. Manual access delays reduced by 64%. Unexplained credential holds reduced by 81%. Complaint closure review time reduced from 30 days to 6. Emergency access disputes escalated automatically in all tested cases. No retaliation findings against Zuri, Ellis, or prior complainants. 3 prior complaint records corrected. 2 contractor payments reimbursed. 4 security officers retrained. 1 supervisor removed. Ronan read the report. "This is not perfect." Callista said, "No." "Good." She smiled. "Only you would call not perfect good. Perfect reports usually mean people stopped looking." Callista accepted that. "Then we keep looking." "Yes." That evening, Ronan walked through the building alone. The control room was quiet. The lobby was bright. The gate opened when the scanner read his credential. He paused anyway. Not because he doubted the system, because memory sometimes stands where danger used to stand. He saw Byron holding the code without scanning it. He heard people like you do not walk into control rooms. He saw the red lights. He heard the warning. Chief engineer override required. Then he saw the students walking through that same gate with their visitor codes held high. He saw Ellis scanning without judgment. He saw Zuri teaching recovery architecture from the main console. He saw Malik asking if he could become chief engineer. The building had not erased what happened. It had done something better. It had remembered in a way that changed behavior. Ronan took out an old photograph from his notebook. His father stood in the hallway of their old apartment building with a tool belt at his waist and tired eyes that still looked kind. On the back, Malik Adeyemi had written one sentence years before he died. Fix the thing that traps people, not only the thing that breaks. Ronan had misunderstood that sentence when he was young. He thought it meant elevators, doors, panels, wires. Now he knew it meant more. A broken relay could trap people. So could a biased guard. So could a manager who ignored a junior engineer. So could a complaint process that stored pain instead of correcting it. So could a board that preferred a clean launch over an honest warning. A cage did not always have bars. Sometimes it had policy language. Sometimes it had instinct. Sometimes it had a badge reader that worked perfectly until a person refused to use it. The next week, Astergate held the delayed expansion preview. It was smaller than originally planned. No theatrical countdown, no exaggerated claims, no statement about flawless systems. Marjorie opened with the truth. Astergate delayed this preview because our technology recovered faster than our organization understood why it failed. We have corrected technical controls. We have changed emergency access rules. We have opened prior complaints. We have learned that a smart building is not smart if its gate is governed by bias. Reporters wrote that line down. Investors asked hard questions. The board answered with logs, policies, audit reports, and independent review. Some investors were uncomfortable. Callista told Ronan later that this was useful.
Uncomfortable with the truth is better than comfortable with a lie. Ronan said, "Now you sound like an engineer." She replied, "Do not insult me." He almost laughed. In the back of the control room, Malik and several students from the tour had been invited to watch the demonstration. When the screen turned green, Malik whispered to Zuri, "It listened." Zuri smiled. "That is the goal." The demonstration ended without incident, but the true ending was not the green screen. It was the gate. A technician Ronan did not know approached security with a temporary emergency code, a faded backpack, and oil on his sleeve. The guard scanned the code. The system verified him. The gate opened. No extra search, no joke, no pause built from suspicion. Only verification, only access. Only a person allowed to do the work he had come to do. Ronan watched from across the lobby. That was when he finally felt the building had changed. Not because it opened for him, because it opened for someone who was not famous inside the story. Byron Slate had thought he was only stopping one black man who did not look like his idea of authority. He thought credential meant performance. He thought security meant suspicion. He thought control of a gate gave him control of who belonged beyond it. But 5 minutes after he refused to scan the truth in Ronan's hand, the building answered him in red. Doors locked. Elevators stopped. Servers heated. Operators froze. And the central system demanded the one person Byron had kept outside. Dr. Ronan Adeyemi did more than restore Civic Grid Nexus. He forced Astergate to understand that every system has two architectures. The one made of code, wires, doors, sensors, and power. And the one made of habits, assumptions, authority, fear, and silence. The first can fail loudly. The second often fails quietly for years. Until one day, a gate refuses to read. A screen turns red. And everyone inside finally learns that the person they excluded was the one who understood how to bring them back. Credentials should be verified by data. Access should be governed by truth. Security should protect people, not punish the people it misreads. And dignity should never be something a person has to present at a checkpoint before being treated as human. The last time Ronan left Astergate that year, the scanner turned green before he reached it. He stopped and looked at the sign. Credentials are verified by data. Dignity is not up for inspection. Then he walked through, not because the gate finally allowed him, because the gate had finally learned its place.